With the best brand of football in Idaho, this is the 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
That's right. Welcome in. It's another edition of the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com, talking the 8-man game week in, week out. Brandon Baney, as always, joined by Will Hoenike. Will, what's going on?
Just trying to figure all this math out, man. I was told that this was going to be a math-free zone, and now I'm trying to figure out how teams move up, how teams move down, what win counts, what win doesn't count. It's giving me a migraine, man. I'm not going to lie to you.
It was the big lie that this was going to be a math-free zone, because that's all we're going to do is talk numbers today and take a look at the playoff picture. Friendly reminder, you can listen to this podcast at IdahoSports.com or wherever you download your podcasts. Video version as well on the IdahoSports.com YouTube channel or Facebook page. You can see what we look like. I'm wearing my glasses today, for example. I usually wear contacts. And I decided to pull this out of the closet, Will. This is a hoodie I got during basketball season last year, but I thought it was really appropriate because here come the Lapway Wildcats, baby. Oh,
they're playing some good ball right now. They're playing some good ball, and they got in a hole early, and now they're in a position which we'll talk about more. They're one of about 4 teams right now in the White Pine that, as long as they keep winning, they've got a pretty good chance to play in the playoffs. But boy, margin for error is not very big up there.
Got to run the table, but if they do get in, that's a scary opponent in an opening round playoff game for sure. Lapway had a huge win over Prairie last Friday that's really kind of thrown the White Pine League into chaos a little bit. So we're going to break it down into 1A D1 discussion first, and then 1A D2 discussion to follow. And again, we'll kind of approach it from, looking at the playoffs. I just posted an update to the Bubble Watch yesterday. It's on the homepage at IdahoSports.com in case you haven't had a chance to go check it out yet. Basically, the exercise is, if the playoffs ended today, who would be in, who would be out, what would the matchups look like? And the more I'm looking at this thing, Will, I don't see a way. There's 9 auto bids and 3 at-large bids for 1A D1 football. And the White Pine League up north gets 3 auto bids. I think that's going to be it for the league. I just don't see how a 4th White Pine team is going to get in with the way the Max Preps ranking system currently works.
Yeah, and however that works, and that, again, that's the great mystery. But, in looking at these Max Prep rankings, and I have them up on my screen over here, I'm looking at them now. You have Cami sitting in that number 4 spot overall based on Max Preps. And then, your next 2 after that, there you are. There you're seeing them. Your next 2 after that, based, again, on the rankings, as you go down, there's Grace, there's Notice, Butte County, and then you get down to Clearwater Valley at 10, Lapway at 11, Potlatch at 12, Prairie at 13, Logos at 14, okay? 2 of those teams are going to make it. And I think Clearwater Valley at 5-2, I think they're in pretty good shape. But then it's with Lapway, Potlatch, Prairie, and Logos, and who knows, maybe Troy, without knowing the mathematical formula, who knows? But it really appears to be as simple as you just got to win. You just got to win. So to that measure, Lapway and Potlatch play this week. That might be one step short of a playoff game, where the winner still can realistically think about playoff football, whereas the loser can think about playing out the string and getting ready for basketball and wrestling. I don't know. But that's certainly how it looks optically from where we sit, without knowing, what all the ingredients are in the recipe.
Yeah, so again, if you're watching the video version of this Prepcast on the IdahoSports.com YouTube channel or Facebook page, I'm sharing my screen right now, and it's got the Max Preps rankings for 1A D1 football. Here's the breakdown for the auto bids. There are the 3 teams from District 2. Right now, Cami very comfortably, in that pole position. Clearwater Valley all alone in second place right now, with just 1 league loss. And right now, there's that tie for third between Potlatch, Prairie, Lapway. It's kind of a mess. For the moment, Prairie still has that third slot, although their hold on that is slipping. They've got the head-to-head win over Potlatch and the head-to-head loss against Lapwai. So Prairie is really going to be cheering for Potlatch this week.
Sure. I mean,
Right.
I think that for some of those teams, if they're not going to win out, they want the waters to be as muddy as possible. They're like Logos, I think right now is rooting for some sort of a tiebreaker because they're playing good football right now and they want to have that opportunity. Prairie, Trenton Lawrence getting hurt really, really spun them backwards. They have not been very explosive on offense, and they've struggled on defense without their best athlete. And we've talked about that ad nauseum on this podcast. We write about it in the previews. We talk about it all the time. In 8-man football, even the best of teams are a twisted ankle or two away from being in a tough bind. Now, my understanding is Lawrence should be back. I don't know if he'll be back this week or potentially next week. So let's not write the eulogy on the Pirates just yet, but they have really felt that impact as they went from a team that was top 5 and looked like pretty much a lock to a team that, they're going to need to win a football game or two here if they want to get one of those spots.
Yeah, Prairie plays in Kuski Friday night against Clearwater Valley, and then they host Logos. So again, if they win out and Potlatch defeats Lapwai, then they get that third slot because, even if they and Potlatch remain tied in the standings, they will have the head-to-head victory over the Loggers. So really, to me, and nothing is set still, right? With 2 games to go in the White Pine League, Kamei could lose the next 2 games and Clearwater Valley could go 2-0. And then all of a sudden the Rams are your league champs. So even Kamei at the top, nothing has been officially clinched yet, but we feel good about Kamei. We feel good about Clearwater Valley. That third spot really up in the air. The rest of the auto bids look like this. From District 3, you're going to get 2 teams. Notice and Rimrock are both 2-0. Rimrock plays Idaho City this week. The Wildcats are 1-1 in league play, 1-5 overall. If Rimrock wins that game, it sets up a showdown with Notice in the regular season finale, where both teams are already going to the playoffs, but the winner will win the conference and get a bye and all that good stuff. So for Idaho City, this is an important game for the Wildcats because if they defeat,
it's a playoff game. It's
right.
a playoff game. If they win, they have a chance. If they lose, they're done. The thing is they could, if they win, they could either beat Rimrock outright for that second spot, or they could wind up tied for second, but then they'd have the head-to-head. So it's for Jason Rober and his team up there. If they want to go to the playoffs, it is a must win game. And Rimrock, they don't have to win it, but it certainly probably makes life a lot simpler. It's a very straight arrow there in that if they win, they're in. And for the Raiders, it's probably been a while since they've been able to say that. And I guarantee that Coach Sam Ward, he's got a young team. He's got some good athletes. I guarantee you they're talking about, if we go up to Idaho City Friday night and take care of business, we are going to the playoffs. And it's been a while since Rimrock's been able to say that.
Yeah, I mean, if Rimrock loses, then they have to not only beat Notice, which is, a tall task.
That's a tall order. That's a very tall order.
But
then Idaho City would have to lose to Wilder as well.
Yeah, and or then they'd have to be on the right side of a tiebreaker as well. You never want to leave it up to tiebreakers. So You're right. Rimrock easiest path is to get a win here and then take on Notice and see what happens. We'll get to District 4 in a second. I'm going to bypass that because that's where the controversy, really is lying in the Max Preps rankings. District 5-6, we know it's Butte County, it's Grace. Butte County beat Chalice Mackey 7C last week. Grace gets to play Chalice Mackey 7C this week, and then Butte County and Grace will play for the league title in the regular season finale. Both those teams very comfortably in. And then District 4 gets 3 auto bids. We like Oakley. We like Raft River. They're the first and second place teams. 4-0 is Oakley. 4-1 is Raft River. Cary currently in third at 3-1. The Panthers play Murtaugh in the regular season finale. That game probably decides, that third auto bid. But both of those teams very firmly in, Cary and Murtaugh both. And then there's Lighthouse Christian at 1-5 overall, 1-3 in the league. I got an email from a Cary fan. And I think it's the same guy that emailed you a couple weeks ago, Will. And he's like, why do you keep talking about Lighthouse Christian? You need to recognize that Carey is the real story in 1AD1. And I don't disagree. Carey has been phenomenal in their transition to 1AD1. But
I don't think that that surprises anybody, though.
Right.
I mean, people who pay attention. Now, there were people that were saying, hey, and this is people I talk to, and I talk to people every week. So going back to June and July and August, there were a lot of people saying, hey, we know that Carey can play, but it's different when you're going up every week against Oakley and then Raft River and then Murtaugh and then Lighthouse Christian and on and on and on and on. No one was ever questioning whether or not Carey could play. The question was, can they carry it out over 8 weeks? And frankly, they have. You take out one game where Grace's defense really locked them down. They've been arguably as good, and I know they've lost another game. I forget who it was against, but it was a similar game where they had some turnover issues. But they've been as good as just about anybody in the state. They really have. And I don't think that there are that many people who are truly surprised by that.
Right. Yeah. Carey's other loss was to Oakley by one possession, 42-36. And I misspoke. Carey and Murtaugh play this Friday. And then Carey wraps up the year with Raft River in a game where if Carey wins that, they could get second place in the league standings. So Carey.
Those are two tough games.
Yes.
Murtaugh's pesky. They've got some kids that can really play ball. They're not super big. They're not super deep, but they've got some kids who can really play. And Raft River, we know Raft River's tough. They're just a tough ball team.
Definitely. So my point to the Carey fan that emailed in is, yes, we recognize Carey's had a great season. And I feel like we've talked about that pretty consistently week in, week out. I think he's taking exception that we keep talking about, Lighthouse Christian, they've been close in a lot of games. And if they can win a couple, they're probably a playoff team. That's because that's what Max Prep says. It's not like we're Lighthouse Christian homers. We're just telling you that's the story. Like that, we're just telling you what the data shows us. And so we have to talk about it because they're 1-5, and yet they're comfortably in the playoffs at this point.
Yeah, they're 1-5, and by the Max Prep's rankings, they're the 9th ranked team in the state. They're ahead of a 5-win team, a 4-win team, multiple 3-win teams. That's a talking point. I don't care who your team is. That's a talking point. And I think it's a talking point for two reasons, because it really draws attention to the fact that no one really has a firm grasp of how this is determined, but it also makes you go look at Lighthouse Christian, which we've talked about a number of times on this very podcast. They've got a lot of speed. They've got a lot of skill. And even though their record is 1-5, they've been in a lot of football games. They could be very easily 3-3. They could very easily be 4-2. But as the way the ball bounces, they're 1-5. But they've been rewarded by the formula, by the math, because of who they've played. They've played an elite schedule. I mean, I don't think you can argue that anyone has played a tougher schedule cumulatively over 6 games than Lighthouse Christian.
I mean, let's look at the schedule here. They have played Oakley, the number 1 team. They've played Raft River, the number 2 team. They've played Carey, the number 3 team. They have played Grace, the number 5 team. They have played Butte County, the number 7 team. And then they played Valley last week and got their first win. So, they have played 4 of the top 7. They have, or 5 of the top 7. They have played 4 of the top 5.
Mm-hmm. and they haven't. It's not like every week. Let's be straight about it. Every week it's not like it's been 58-6. There have been some really good football games in there that the Lions have just come up on the short end of the stick.
So I think this is the big thing with Lighthouse Christian, and we'll dive into their resume here in a second. Let's talk about these at large bids and why I think only 3 White Pine teams are going to get in. I'll walk you through this exercise. So there are 3 at large bids available. One of them is going to go to either Grace at number 5 or Butte County at number 7. District 5-6 only gets 1 auto bid, right? So these These two are both comfortably in. So now you're down to 2 bids. Murtaugh, number 8. Their ranking is 43.7. That's a pretty healthy lead. You feel pretty good about Murtaugh or Carey or Raft River, whoever takes 4th in that league, getting an at-large bid. So now you're down to 1. And that's where you look at Lighthouse Christian, the next team on the line, at 35.5. Lapway is the closest at 32.9. This number in the middle column here, so for Oakley 72.1, that's their Max Preps ranking. The number to the right of that is their strength of schedule ranking. So Oakley has played the toughest schedule in 8-man football this year at 49.3, but right behind them is Lighthouse at 48.4. And then there's nobody else within, 15 points of that.
Yeah.
So,
and those of you that are watching on YouTube and you're able to look at what we're saying, look at those teams around them. Murtaugh 23.5, Clearwater Valley 27.8, Lapway 22, Potlatch 11.4. Depending on the weight of that number, which obviously because it has Lighthouse Christian at number 9. There is some significant weight to that number. It's going to be tough for some of those teams that are down a little bit lower. Could Glens Ferry, if they sneak out a couple of wins, could they make a little bit of a move up? Perhaps, but again, it's that strength of schedule thing, because Glens Ferry at 42.6 is third. And they're all out of those same districts. But I think you're right in that, Lighthouse Christian, as long as they don't really stumble, they're in pretty good position, which is, logically, that seems weird to say about a team that's 1-5.
Right. So we have in addition to this Prepcast, we have regional Prepcasts all around the state, right? North Idaho, Treasure Valley, Magic Valley, East Idaho for, region specific content. Last year on the Magic Valley Prepcast, Scott Burton is my co-host for that. And he called Max Preps and said, "Hey, explain to me how this formula works." And they couldn't tell him. They said, "We don't know the exact formula," which it boggles my mind that Max Preps doesn't know that. But what Scott was able to find out was strength of schedule definitely matters. And there is some sort of built-in mechanism that takes into account your expected outcome. So for example, Lighthouse Christian at 1-5 plays Carey at 4-2. The expected outcome is Carey wins by 3 scores. And I'm just using this as an example. Well, if Lighthouse Christian only loses by 1 score when they were expected to lose by 3, that gives them a significant boost as well. So for Lighthouse Christian, having 1 possession losses to both Grace and Carey, in addition to their strength of schedule, has elevated them. That is my analysis of what we're seeing here.
I mean, and that makes sense. Now you can argue whether or not you think that that's a good formula.
Right.
I think there's an argument to be made both for and against it, but it does make some sense. It does. I don't mind rewarding teams for playing tougher, because God knows we've seen some games this year that have just gotten away from teams, and they've been, they've been pretty hard to watch. So I don't mind you giving a little bit of a nod to a team that is able to keep some games close, and especially when you're playing some of those big boys.
Definitely. So again, looking at this Max Preps breakdown, the second reason I think there won't be a White Pine team that jumps ahead is because last week Lighthouse Christian was ahead of Clearwater Valley in the rankings. And it was close between the two teams. Clearwater Valley goes out and defeats Potlatch. Lighthouse Christian defeats Valley. Now, you and I, using our brains and our eyes, will tell you Clearwater Valley's win was more impressive, right? Potlatch is a better team than Valley. And yet, despite the bigger signature win, Clearwater Valley still couldn't leapfrog Lighthouse Christian. So if Clearwater Valley couldn't leapfrog Lighthouse after beating Potlatch, I don't know how anybody in the White Pine, even if they win, is going to be able to leapfrog Lighthouse. Does that make sense?
Logically, what you're saying makes sense. It's going to be tough. And that's why if you're Prairie, if you're Logos, if you're Potlatch and Lapwai, end of the day, the name of the game is to win. Your playoffs are officially underway, or unofficially underway, I should say. You've still got games to play, but if you don't get it done Friday, if you don't get it done this week, the rest probably doesn't matter much except for window dressing.
Yep. And so, yes, in the White Pine League, buckle up. These last 2 weeks are going to be phenomenal and somewhat disappointing all at the same time, because there really should be more teams from the White Pine that make the playoffs. But it's the hand they've been dealt. So I guess we will have to wait and see with that. Okay. So 1A football, or 1A D1 football. We've kind of wrapped up the discussion there. Is there anything else you wanted to hit on for anything last week or coming up? I think we hit all the big stuff, but
no, I think we get the big stuff all pretty good, and I think we're kind of at a point now where we're able to look ahead a little bit more, a little clearer, instead of the paths are narrowing, so it's a little easier to kind of have an eye a couple weeks down the road.
Right. Okay. Well, let's move to 1A D2 football then, and this was a conversation I wanted to have with you. And that is, we talked about, max preps and scheduling tough versus, scheduling not so tough. And Kendrick has run into a real problem up north where nobody wants to play them. Now, on our North Idaho Prepcast that we recorded yesterday, I was a little harsh on Timberline, and I'm going to apologize, not just here, but on that podcast next week as well. Timberline forfeited their league matchup with Kendrick, right? And I said that, well, nobody wants to play Kendrick right now. Timberline looked and said, yeah, no thanks, we're good. Coach West, sent me an email, sent me a message and said, hey, we don't mind playing Kendrick. We wanted to play Kendrick, but the week we were supposed to, we only had 7 kids. We had some injuries. We had a kid who, was out for other reasons, and we didn't have enough bodies to play Kendrick, and there was nowhere else on the schedule with 2 weeks to go to make up that game. So yes, we had to forfeit, but it's not because we didn't want to play Kendrick. It's because we couldn't. We literally only had, less than 8 players. So again, my apologies to Timberline. I wanted to make that distinction.
Well, and that's very much of a factor for a number of schools, especially in the D2 ranks. You might only have 11 or 12 kids rostered. Meadows Valley earlier this season was given it a go with, 8.5 kids. They had their 8, and they had one sub who, if I'm not mistaken, was not 100% healthy, and I might be wrong there, so don't completely quote me on that, but we hear that frequently. We hear that frequently where teams, they're beat up for whatever reason. Maybe a kid didn't get his science homework done, so he's not eligible to play. And all of a sudden, especially when you've got that Kendrick looming on the schedule, and we talk about margin for error a lot. We'll talk about it again. Timberline's margin for error was probably not very good to begin with against a team like Kendrick, who I think they have proven that regardless of classification, they're the best 1A football team in the state right now. I think they've proven it because they went head-to-head with Oakley and they beat them.
Yep.
So if you're a Timberline, you need everything working for you going into that matchup to begin with. And only having 6 kids, I mean, if they had a full hand, it was going to be a big challenge for them.
Yep, I agree. So, Timberline, again, the big game for them is next Friday against Lewis County. Winner of that game gets the second bid to the state playoffs. So that's what they're really gearing up for. They were able to pick up a game on Tuesday against the Lapwai JV. They won that game pretty convincingly, I think 70-14. They're going to play the Orofino JV this Friday. So they're still getting games in, and they're, like I said, gearing up for that Lewis County match. So Kendrick has had to play a lot of Washington schools this year for 2 different reasons. One, because District 1 decided to basically play a conference schedule twice, right? Everybody was supposed to play each other twice. And that pretty much filled up the entire schedules for all of the District 1 teams. So it's not like Mullen St. Regis could go play Kendrick. I'm sure they'd love to, but, with 7 conference games, It's just not going to happen. So Kendrick has had to go next door to Washington, and they've had nothing but problems. They played Wilbur Creston Keller, back in September in a game that was called in the third quarter. Wilbur Creston Keller waved the white flag and said, there's no point in continuing. We're done. Last week, they play Liberty Bell, Washington. The game gets called in the second quarter. And again, it's because of apparent concerns over injuries. Now, the impression I got, the Lewiston Tribune did a nice job of writing about this and summarizing it. The Liberty Bell parents, I think, thought that Kendrick was playing dirty, which they absolutely were not. Kendrick is just really good, really powerful. And if you're not ready to handle that as a varsity team, it can be kind of jaw-dropping when it actually happens. So they call the game before it's even halftime, and Kendrick's like, what do we got to do, right?
Yeah, it's and not having seen the video, it's not fair for me to comment other than I talked to a number of I specifically talked to Justin Podrabski, the Genesee coach, after Kendrick hung 100 points on him, and he's like, nope, no issues, no concerns. They were on the clear, they were on the up and up, they were respectful, they were sportsmanlike. Just sometimes you just can't control what's happening when you're that good. And he even made the joke, something to the effect of, Kendrick is the number 1A Division II team in the state. Their JV might be number 2. I mean, that's just how good they are right now. And unfortunately, when you're scrambling to fill games, and there was a concern earlier this week, they've scheduled another Washington team this week, Tico Rosalia. That's a not very good team, up near Spokane. And they had lost their game last week, 70-something-0. So there, and Coach Zane Hobart said there were concerns on whether or not that game would happen. And I said, well, if it gets canceled, what do you do? And he just shrugged and said, I guess we got another bye week. So it's tough for them, because if you're Kendrick, what do you do? And I've heard enough from opposing coaches in Idaho that have said Kendrick is fine. They're not dirty. They're not cheap. They're not unsportsmanlike. They're just that good. And when other coaches are pretty free about saying that, I feel pretty comfortable. I feel pretty comfortable with that, what they're saying. So if you're Kendrick, what do? You can't tell the kids, okay, well, maybe play 50%. Are you gonna bench your starters? Are you gonna punish your good players because they're too good by not letting them play? What do you do? What do you do? It's a bummer deal, and I'm sorry to hear that the Liberty Bell game ended the way that it ended. Wilbur Creston, I don't know the specifics of that, but again, it's, if people want to look at those scores and raise a flag, I'd say look at what Kendrick's been doing to people for 2 years now, and look at what they're probably going to do to him for another 2 years. It's a really good program, and at some point you got to let him play. And to Coach West's point down at Timberline, hey, we'll go play. You just got to know going in, if you don't play good football, you're going to take it on the chin, and you're going to take it on the chin hard, because that's just how good Kendrick is.
Yeah, and I guess this is where I take exception to the Washington schools. The same thing happened to Sandpoint at the 4A level, where 2 years in a row Colville had a game scheduled against Sandpoint, looked at it and said, nah, we're going to cancel. We don't want to play.
If you're concerned, because you can't tell me when they were looking like Liberty Bell or Wilbur Creston or whoever, Tico Rosalia now, unless they are simply not even bothering to check, they're very aware of what Kendrick is. If you don't think your team is ready to play at that level, and not all teams are, I'm not judging, not all teams are. If you don't think your team is ready to play at that level, don't schedule that game.
Yeah.
It's really pretty simple.
Don't schedule it, and if you do schedule it, make the commitment and play the full game.
Play the game. Play the game.
I'm sick of it, to be honest, with these Washington schools. A good thing this isn't a Washington podcast.
Hey, I'm from Washington. Be nice to me.
For sure. But that brings me to the bigger question I wanted to ask you, and then we'll dive into this 1A D2 specifics for playoffs and stuff. But we've seen this year where, Wilder had a game against Camas County and they canceled it, where I'm trying to remember, Rimrock had a game against, I can't remember if it was Castleford or who it was, but they canceled it, where teams are looking and saying, you know what, we're not going to play you. The disparity is too large. Is that, I'm worried it's going to create a system of almost like in college football, where all the powerful schools just play each other, and the schools that are on the other end that are building but not quite there yet are kind of left on their own. Is it going to create this class separation system of the haves and the have-nots, where the have-nots are not playing the haves anymore?
I think to a large extent, you can almost make that argument that it already exists to a degree. The thing that I do like about the Max Preps thing, given the strength of schedule thing, it's forced some teams to schedule some tougher games. Kyle Dalsolio at Wilder, I remember him telling me last year, after they went 5-3 and missed the playoffs, they were not selected as one of the at-large teams. He was able to basically remedy that a little bit by, okay, I've got to go schedule Murtaugh. I can't just load up, and I'm not singling Wilder out as though they, schedule down. There are a lot of teams in District 3 where you have Western Idaho Conference and Longpin just kind of cross over because it's convenient. It's an hour bus ride instead of a 4-hour bus ride. You're not pulling kids out of school. You're not missing days. You're not, having to do all this fancy things. It's jump on the bus after school, go play the game, come home. You're in your own bed by, 10:30, 11 o'clock. So the Max Preps thing, the one thing that I like about it so far is that it's forcing some teams to schedule some tougher games instead of just taking kind of the low-hanging fruit a little bit. And Wilder will benefit, as will anybody that's being forced to play up a little bit instead of just loading up on the 1A D2s down the block, so to speak. I think that it's part of why some of these things like the Idaho 8-Man Classic have been such a good thing, because they're forcing tougher teams to play each other, and there isn't a way to dodge anybody anymore. As for games getting canceled, I think those still need to be considered on a case-by-case basis. The game that Rimrock canceled was much like the Timberline game, where they've only got 13, 14 kids on the roster, and they had 4 or 5 kids out, whether it was injuries or illness or whatever. They physically didn't have enough bodies, and it really drives home the importance of rostering, being able to roster enough kids. Some of these newer / smaller schools, like Meadows Valley, they're battling some of those growing pains right now. Mullen had to combine with St. Regis to make sure that they were able to stay on the field, but head coach and athletic director Stetson Spooner did what he needed to do to keep his kids on the field, and I think that should be commended. Some of these ones like Rimrock, if you've never seen where Rimrock is, just find about the least populated part of Idaho that you can find and put a dot, and that's probably Rimrock High School. Who are you going to co-op with? So if you're going to try and co-op that way, I don't know how you're going to do it. So they have what they have, and if they have injuries and if they have illnesses, Camas County would be another one that's somewhat similar to that geographically a little bit. Idaho City is another one that geographically could be a little bit like that as well. And when you're down numbers, if it's a legit thing, I don't mind it. I do kind of cock an eyebrow when mysteriously, and I'm using this as an example, I'm not saying this is what's happening, but mysteriously Oakley has 3 straight non-conference games canceled. You know what I mean? That's, what's happening, potentially to Kendrick would cause one to look at it and say, okay, do we have teams ducking, or do we have legitimate issues here? And you heard firsthand from Timberline's coaching staff, they had legitimate issues there. Pulling the plug at halftime because your team's getting beat, that's not as legit to me.
Yeah. I just, if you're a team that's trying to build and you're not ready to compete with the Kendricks of the world, I think you do have to have a game or two where you challenge your team and I really like what Clark County has done, where it's a hybrid JV varsity schedule, right? They've played some JV teams from other schools, but their league games, they're not, technically a member of the league, a full-fledged member, but they played, North Gems varsity, and they're playing Rockland's varsity, and they're playing Water Springs. I mean, it's varsity games, and they're on the wrong end of it, but it's going to make them stronger. It's going to make them a better team.
Yeah, and specifically to that example, to the Clark County example, Corey Hatch, the head coach at North Gem, was like, hey, nothing but respect. They didn't have a lot of kids. We got up on them. We got a lead. And he's like, you know what they did? They kept scrapping until the clock hit all zeros. They competed. They worked their butts off. And I think that kids, given the choice, are always going to want to play. They're always going to want to, hey, we're good. Let's go play. Meadows Valley, we talked about them a little bit. Jared McElvain, the head coach there, has told me a couple of times, we had a couple of games that started to get away from us. We only had 8 kids dressed for that given game. Do we want to think about, pulling the plug? Do we want to think about canceling? Do we want to think about exploring a co-op? And he said his kids have been adamant. No, we're Meadows Valley. We're the Mountaineers, and we're here. Let's go play. And I think that kids in general are going to want to do that. Kids are going to want to compete. So like we were talking about earlier, they being healthy and being able to roster enough kids, that's the trick. And as long as you can do it. Let's go play. And if you got a tough team on the schedule, you know what? Goliath fell hard. And the only way Goliath's ever going to fall hard is if you throw a rock at him. If you don't even throw a rock at him, he's never going to fall.
Well, and before you can throw the rock, you have to step into the arena as well.
Correct.
So, I don't know. Good food for thought. Interesting philosophical discussion that really came to my attention this year, maybe more so than in years past, but we'll move on.
Well, it does feel like that it's been a little more prevalent the last year or two. And I know that COVID concerns were a part of it for some, but also there are just some teams that roster-wise, they just don't have particularly deep rosters. And, there are teams like Salmon River, for one, and Riggins. They do not have a deep roster. But their coaching staff up there is looking at the junior high, and they're seeing a couple bigger classes come up. So they're thinking, and I'm speaking for them. They haven't said this to me, but the rationale would be, if we can just hang on, if we can just kind of ride through this storm, help's on the way. And I hope there's help on the way for everybody. Kootenai's another one that has had some trouble with numbers in the not so distant past. Hopefully there's help coming for them too. And I'd like to see 16, 18, 20 kids on every team. Let's play full JV schedules. Let's play full games. Let's load them up. Let's fill those jerseys. Let's fill those buses, and let's give those towns, a team that they can really get behind.
Definitely. Yep. It's going to be interesting to watch how those schools adapt and thrive. What's going on right now, though? We were talking about Clark County. Let's keep it in District 5-6, where the first domino fell, right? This 3-team round robin over the final 3 weeks of the regular season. Water Springs delivers the first blow in a pretty big way over North Gem, a 42-0 shutout. And so now it sets up Water Springs and Rockland this Friday. A win by the Warriors gives them the league title.
Yeah, and they have arguably, well, I don't even think it's arguable. I think they have the best player in that conference in terms of what he's doing on the field on a week-in, week-out basis in Drew Plocker. Rockland has some kids that can play. Teague Matthews, the Permans, they've got some kids that can play. So far, what Water Springs seems to have done better than the other 2 teams in that conference is take care of the football. And Corey Hatch said, we're sometimes our own worst enemy. Some games, North Gems looked pretty dang good. Other games, they haven't looked as good. And same thing with Rockland. They've had some turnover issues that has hampered them in a couple of games that maybe if they play cleaner football, maybe they get the win. And I would expect if Water Springs can take care of the ball, and if they can limit Rockland's big plays, I would expect Water Springs to win that football game.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to watch. And then Rockland will play North Gem next Friday in the regular season finale, to where, North Gem is going to be cheering for Rockland, because then if Rockland beats Water Springs and North Gem beats Rockland, then it creates this three-way tie.
You're right back where you started. Everybody's on the same playing field.
Yeah, and I haven't even reached out to ask how that would be settled. I assume it would be some sort of point differential amongst the conference games, to settle.
Hard to say. It seems like more and more, especially when you're talking about the possibility of having to really travel. If you play a tiebreaker on Monday and then you have to travel on Thursday to play on Friday, maybe if you're Water Springs, and I'm making this up, I don't have the bracket in front of me, but if you're Water Springs and you would have to go to, say, Lewis County, you want as much time to get ready for that as you can, instead of gearing up for a play-in, the playoff, and then having, basically 2 days to get ready for your next game. That's a tough challenge. So it does feel like, and maybe it's just a perception, maybe it's not a reality at all, but it seems like more and more people are open to finding alternative tie-breaking methods, such as point differential versus, let's just do a Kansas City tiebreaker and call it good.
Right. Because that's a Monday, you're taking kids out of school as well. So for sure. So yes, here are the cleanest paths are Water Springs beats Rockland, or Rockland beats Water Springs at North Gem. And then 1 and 2 is pretty easy. North Gem is the only team that doesn't control its own fate anymore and needs some help and some chaos to reign there. So we'll see what happens when Water Springs takes on Rockland. District 4 had the game of the week, though. Dietrich, Castleford, battle of undefeated teams. Really the key to me, Will, I thought, was Dietrich got up 14-0 early. And then the two sides kind of traded scores from there. But that 2-score lead that Dietrich built up at the start carried them to the finish.
Yeah, and Castleford's defense is tremendous, and their offense has been fine. It's not like they're scoring 8 points a game or anything like that. But in an 8-man game, it's hard to chase points like that. When a team starts to build up a little separation, you're going to eventually have to create some turnovers, create some change of possession to come back. And it can certainly happen. God knows we've seen it happen often enough. But you don't want to get yourself in a hole where you're chasing a team like Dietrich. That's a really good football team there. And, if you're going to trade punches with them, just make sure you're trading punches on the level, not trading punches when you're already trailing on all 3 scorecards, to kind of go with the boxing analogy there.
Right. Cody Power threw a couple of touchdowns early. Case Robertson did his usual thing, made some big plays for Dietrich. The play of the game, I thought, though, actually came from Castleford. And they've kind of quietly made this shift where at the start of the year, Jamie Ramos was playing quarterback and Ethan Rowland was the returning all-state wide receiver. They've kind of flip-flopped that now, where Rowland is the quarterback and Ramos is playing wide out. Mm-hmm. And on Friday in Dietrich, this was a game that we had on IdahoSports.com. So I went back and watched it. There's a play down near the goal line where Ethan Rowland is rolling out to his right. Ramos cuts back towards the left part of the end zone, and Rowland throws it across his body, like through a defender to Ramos for the touchdown. It was a really impressive display of athleticism from Ethan Rowland. It was pretty. And
I don't think people, he's a good sized kid.
Yeah.
He's not some 5'7", 140-pound scat back. He's 6'1", 6'2". He's probably 170, 180 pounds. I don't think that he gets sometimes the attention that he has earned and that he deserves. He's a really good football player, and he does it on both sides of the ball. And as you mentioned, he did it some last year as well with Eric Taylor, where, sometimes he'd be quarterback and Eric Taylor would be, at receiver. And then sometimes Eric Taylor would be the quarterback and Rowland would line up at a running back. They move him around to exploit matchups, seems to be what they're trying to do, and they've done it with pretty good success.
Definitely. So Dietrich is in the driver's seat, but they're not out of the woods yet because they've got to take on Camas County on Friday. And so there's 3 bids to the playoffs from this league, and there are 4 teams still fighting for it. It's Dietrich, Castleford, Camas County, and Hanson. Hanson finishes the year with Castleford and Camas County. So if the Huskies go 2-0, They just played themselves into a playoff spot. Nothing is settled yet in this conference with 2 weeks to go.
No, it's not. But it's realistically, you look at it, Hanson has to play their way in. That's what's going to happen. Excuse me. And, all you want as a competitor is you want that chance. You don't want to be North Gem where you're really hoping somebody else loses. You want to be the team that has a chance to go do it yourself, and they have that chance.
Yep. District 3, we've got some pretty intriguing stuff going on there where I'll admit I kind of thought Horseshoe Bend was the favorite against Garden Valley last Friday. I was wrong, and Garden Valley deserves a little more credit and respect than what I have given them, as they really took it to Horseshoe Bend, and now it sets up these 2 really fascinating games in District 3 where Council and Garden Valley will meet this Friday for essentially the regular season conference title and the first round bye that comes with that. And then on the other end, you've got Tri-Valley taking on Horseshoe Bend, and that is a game that's going to decide that 3rd playoff spot from the district.
The thing I've been really impressed with Garden Valley in looking at them from afar, defensively, they've been really good. Jaden Hunt, Aaron Noakes leading the way on that defense. Teams are having a hard time hitting explosive plays on them in 8-man football. If you can't break a big one, it's going to be a pretty long day for you. And they don't give up a lot. And then you turn around on offense, and Tacoma Kelly and crew are continuing to do a good job there. But I've been really impressed with Garden Valley's defense. Caden Zimmer, 2 interceptions, 3 interceptions this past week in that game against Horseshoe Bend. I think that I'd have to go back and listen to our exact conversation from early in the year. I think both of us had Garden Valley pegged as a probable playoff team. But right now, I wonder if they're not the probable conference champion. Now they have to go to Council. Okay, that's not going to be an easy game because that Council team is a good team. But, Garden Valley's playing some really, really good football right now, and they really have been all year. And the thing that I like about them is the crescendo is going this way, right? Horseshoe Bend started strong. They've run into a couple buzzsaws here in the last few weeks, and they've taken a couple L's. They need to right that ship, and they need to get going back the other direction. I still think they're a good team. That I don't know that I'd be too thrilled to see the Mustangs opposite me in a state playoff game, but they've got to fix the way the car is rolling right now, and they need it rolling a little bit in another direction. And Tri-Valley is. They're playing for their playoff lives as well. So they're not just going to show up and lay down. So, Coach Elliott and the Mustangs, they've got some work in front of them in that matchup to get things turned around and get things going. But boy, that Council Garden Valley game, that's a really good matchup.
Yeah, and there's a great sense of urgency now for Horseshoe Bend where they have to win this game Friday or they are out of the playoff picture. And so it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. Yeah, for Garden Valley, they kind of had a soft schedule early. They kept piling up these wins, and I was kind of in the back of my mind going, prove it against a good team. Well, they went out and did that. And I think what I forgot along the way about Garden Valley is Jason Yearsley is a hell of a coach. He's so good. I kind of forgot about that, but I was reminded.
They just seem to do it every year. And the thing is they're kind of like they're kind of like Rimrock in that you don't necessarily hear a ton about them because there's not like, the Garden Valley Gazette newspaper that has a beat writer at practice every day or anything like that. So, you have an idea. Like we can look at them on paper, and we did when we wrote the preview, and we're like, well, they got a few pretty good ball players there. Let's see what they can do. And then, like you said, a couple early games where maybe not the most the staunchest, stiffest schedule of all time. And they do what, and this is the thing when teams say, excuse me.
Yeah, fine.
Well, man, they're playing a soft schedule. What are you supposed to do against a soft schedule? You're supposed to win 70-0. So they did what they were supposed to do.
Right.
And now they're getting into the holy cow, man.
You're all right.
Here.
Get some water. Get a little H2O, a little hydration. No, I
holy
think
cow. Now they're getting to that tougher part of their schedule. And again, they're doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So Garden Valley has got to an interesting game coming up on Friday for sure. Let's wrap up the conversation up north in District 1, up in the North Star League, where Mullen St. Regis played Clark Fork for the second time last Friday and won 56-40. So, pretty similar margins. The first time Mullen St. Regis won by 18. This time they win by 16. So the two sides, are about, 2 to 3 scores apart. But the Wampus Cats we've talked about, pretty exciting that they're honing in on that second playoff slot. But one big test still awaits them Friday night in Clark Fork. They will host Wallace for the second time this year. The winner of that game gets that second playoff spot. Earlier this year, Clark Fork and Wallace played in Wallace, and the Wampus Cats won that night by a score of 42-14. Now, Wallace was missing Landon Streeter. He'll be back for this game. So I still lean Clark Fork, but it wouldn't surprise me to see Wallace come out and win this.
Yeah, I think, and I'm excited to have some Ricola going now, so maybe I can actually get through an answer without coughing.
Ricola.
Yep. No, I would agree with you. I would lean Clark Fork, but I would openly acknowledge that a healthy Landon Streeter added to Parker Goldade and Eric Wilkinson and some of those other players, they give Wallace more than a puncher's chance. But that Clark Fork team is good. Ethan Howard, Chase San Roman, that's a good group up there. And the Wampus Cats, I'm going to guess, even if they haven't publicly been saying it, the fact that they've got that carrot dangling there's some fired up kids up there this week. And I would be shocked if they don't, come out of the tunnel, so to speak, with their hair on fire, just ready to go and lock this thing up.
Yep, for sure. Mullen St. Regis wins the conference by virtue of that win over Clark Fork last week. So you could already pencil in the Tigers for that first round bye and all the things that come along with it. They get a first round bye, and then they will get the winner of the 3B versus 2B. So that could be, Horseshoe Bend / Tri-Valley / Timberline / Lewis County. Could be any of those 4 teams that Mullen St. Regis would see in the quarterfinal round. And then they're on the
Mullen
same.
St. Regis, they've done pretty good in that round the last couple of years. It's then going and playing Cary or Dietrich that has proven a little more challenging. But as Coach Spooner has said, it's been the incremental steps, and each year they've gotten just a little bit farther and done just a little bit better. So maybe this is the year they kind of punch through.
Well, and if everything shakes out the way we think it will, you're looking at Mullen St. Regis having to play Dietrich in that semifinal round. So a chance to exorcise the demons of the past. I wanted to wrap on this pretty cool story with Mullen St. Regis where they had an injury to their starting center. So John Pruitt, the starting running back, kind of volunteered and said, hey, coach, I'll step up and play center. It's such an unselfish move, and it paved the way for a really cool story.
Yeah, John Pruitt is a good running back, and he's like, no, I got this. I'll play center. And so they were able to move some kids around and give some other kids some opportunities to play at running back. And so Pruitt, instead of being the ball carrier that was running for touchdowns, he was the one blowing open the holes for other ball carriers to run for touchdowns. And that kind of versatility is key, but also that kind of a team first mentality is, I think, very, very crucial. And I see it a lot, and I love to point it out when I hear examples like this of a kid. And it happens at Raft River sometime with Treg Whitaker. He moves around some depending on the opponent, the situation, the matchups, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I love to hear those stories. I love to hear a kid that's like, no, I will do what's best for the team. And you like to see that rewarded. And Mullen was rewarded with a big win last week. And
then Austin Zingler gets the start at running back, first career start for the junior, and ends up rushing for, over 100 yards.
I think it was close to 150 and a couple of scores, had a really nice game.
Yeah, and it was, Pruitt and company leading the way up front. So that was kind of a cool story from Mullen this past week. All right, we've gone long again. We'll probably go long next week talking about these final playoff matchups. And then once we get to the playoffs, I think we can condense things a little bit. But yeah, we've got an exciting slate of games coming up this week. On IdahoSports.com, I didn't even mention this, but we've got a pretty fascinating 8-man battle where it's a non-conference game at the D1 level. Raft River at Butte County, Friday night for Marco. You
really
can watch
good
that
matchup.
Yeah,
really good matchup there, and I'm really interested to see it because, we mentioned earlier, Raft River, they're just a tough team. They're just they kind of go in the mold of their coach. Just a little bit of a tough, no-nonsense team. And Butte County, I've been on that Butte County train since day one. I'm not getting off of it now. Trayden Allen, Corey Gamet, Rebel Beard, go up and down that list. They've got a bunch of guys who can hurt you. And they're due for, and I'm not saying that this means they're going to get it, but they're due for that game that makes people go, oh, okay. That's what he's talking about. They're due for that game. And if they can have it this week on Idaho Sports against Raft River, that's what's going to make folks say, okay, again, that's why Butte County's been that high all along.
Yeah.
Now, Raft River, on the other hand, they have a chance to remind people, hey, we're the team that's been to the last 2 state championship games. We're the team that wins these matchups. So they get a chance likewise to make the entire state stop and remember that there's a pretty good football program in Malta.
Yeah, and in fact, Trojans fans, set your watch. The last 2 games of the year for Raft River will both be on IdahoSports.com. Butte County this week and then Cary in that regular season finale. So that'll be
a great game. Raft River Cary will be a great game.
Yeah, we've got some good ones on tap still along the way here on IdahoSports.com. All right, we'll duck out, though. Try and cut it to just under an hour. Sorry about that. I think the 8-man fans are okay with
2 minutes and 50 seconds.
All right, let's wrap it up. Thanks for tuning into the Idaho 8-man Prepcast. Enjoy the competitions this week, everybody. For Will Hoenike, I'm Brandon Baney. We'll see you next time on IdahoSports.com.